Exist, resist, return. You may have heard this chant at the Nakba events, which have been happening this month to mark May 15th, 1948, the official day for commemorations. But with record numbers killed and displaced once again throughout the occupied Palestinian territories, a growing movement online is asking, is this Nakba 2.0? I'm Myriam Francois, and this is The Stream. Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic, refers to the ongoing mass displacement and ethnic cleansing of the indigenous Palestinian people from their land by settler communities. With 75% of the population of Gaza, or almost 2 million people, now forcibly displaced, are we witnessing its most violent chapter yet? And what might this mean for the future of Palestine?
وهي رابع مرة احنا ننزح، كل مرة بننزح، كل لما نمشي بمنطقة يقصفوا فيها، مش عارفين وين نروح.
النازحين اللي نزحوا على الجنوب تكرر ايش اللي تعين الجنوب هاي بدي ينزحوا على مناطق الوسط.
وين نروح؟ وين نروح لاولادنا؟ احنا بدناش شيء، بدنا امان، بدنا امن وامان.
امي وابوي حكونا عن النكبة الاولانية، لكن احنا الحين النكبة هذا امر.
اكثر من هالنكبة ما في نكبة. عندي الحين حوالي 80 سنة مثل هالنكبة ما شفت. ما ظلش حاجة، ايش ظل لنا نبكي عليه؟
لما طلعنا من البلاد كنا قصرنا زي ما هو، على اساس انه بدهم يرجعوا.
كل واحد طاح قعد له في خيمة وظلينا قاعدين لهذا اليوم واحنا مشردين ونحمل اسم لاجئ.
ونام تحت الزيتونات اللي إلي فيها وهنيك الارض اللي إلي.
فلسطين دائما وطننا الاساسي فلسطين، العالم كلها بتخلق وإلى وطن، نحن وطننا بعيش فينا.
ومفتاح العودة اللي احنا معلقينه في بيوتنا كلياتنا سنعطيه من جيل إلى جيل، حتى في يوم من الأيام أحد هذه الأجيال سيعود إلى أرض المهجرة ويعيش فيها إن شاء الله بعد أن تتحرر فلسطين.
To discuss this, I'm joined by three Palestinians who each have their own story of displacement. Darin J Sallam is a Jordanian Palestinian filmmaker. She joins us from Amman. Ghanameh is a Palestinian author and illustrator based in New York. And Khalil Sayegh is a Palestinian political analyst, and he is joining us from Cairo. Thank you so much for being here with us. Darin, your film, Farha, is based on real events in 1948. Why was it important for you to make a film about the Nakba?
Because the Nakba is the root cause of what we're seeing today, what we're witnessing in Palestine. And this event that not only affect the Palestinians when it happened, but also the Arab world, and it shaped how the world is today. And when I wrote the first draft in 2016, I remember it was like a taboo to talk about Nakba. And I felt so much resistance to make this film. And this only made me determined to tell this story. And I felt it's so needed and it's so important to make it.
Yeah.
To share the story with the world.
And Aya, you've written and illustrated a children's book about a Palestinian family already living in a refugee camp in Nablus who are displaced after the 1967 war. Why was it important for you to tell this story of the second major displacement affecting Palestinians?
So my book, These Olive Trees, follows my grandmother's story, who the protagonist is named after, and her displacement from Nablus in 1967 after her family had already had to leave their home in Haifa in 1948 upon the Nakba. It was important for me to tell this story of my grandmother's displacement set after the initial Nakba of 1948 for two main reasons. The first is that every Palestinian has a similar story. Growing up in Jordan in a community of displaced Palestinians, I'd never been confronted with having to justify and affirm my identity and experience until I went to the US as a college student. And I learned very quickly that this isn't unique to me, and it's just part of the Palestinian experience in the diaspora. And for me, this book came out of an accumulation of these feelings and experiences. Telling my grandmother's story was the natural place for me to start talking about Palestine, because when I think about the Palestinian people, I think about how every Palestinian has a grandmother story. And the second reason is that the Nakba of 1948 is not an event, but a process. The Nakba didn't end, and my grandmother's story never ended. Members of my family and community have been displaced one way or another since the beginning stages of Zionist colonization and continue to be to this day. We see this in Gaza and we see it in the West Bank and Jerusalem. Families are separated and isolated by Israeli apartheid policies, by a literal separation wall. They're displaced by home demolitions, forced evictions, restriction to work and movement, unsanitary conditions, incarceration, and more.
Yeah.
And murdered in cold blood with impunity, shot or bombed with American weapons. So to understand the Nakba as a process, we have to begin to understand the roots of the struggle and why 3 and 4 generations later we continue the struggle.
Yeah, and Khalil, you're a Palestinian from Gaza, so this is not a historical event for you at all. It's affecting you right now. Can you tell me about the current experience of displacement and whether what we're witnessing is what some people are calling the Nakba 2.0?
Yes, it is. It's a second Nakba in the sense that what have happened in 48 is re-happening again. It's we are reliving the displacements of 48. Not that we haven't been living it for the past years, as my colleagues have mentioned. The displacement and the enforcement of the apartheid system that have divided people, families, etc., and forced them out has been happening incrementally for the last years. But what we've seen in Gaza is some sort of just like speeding up the process of the Nakba that we are living to a more mass migration or forced migration from Gaza. In a personal level, my family have experienced Nakba in 48 when my grandparents walked from the city of Majdal, located in historical Palestine within the southern part of historical Palestine, to Gaza. And as they were walking under the heat and under really harsh circumstances during the war, the brother of my grandpa have passed away. And in a very similar tragic way, my father and my sister were killed during this genocidal attack on Gaza. My father have refused to leave Gaza despite the forced displacement and bombardments, and he ended up dying at the Latin Church in Gaza because the prevented medical necessity from getting into the church. The tanks were surrounding it. And my sister, like my great uncle, has passed away as she was walking in the 24th of April from the north of Gaza to the south, to Rafah, seeking refugee. And right now, like my grandparents, my mother is here in Cairo, wondering whether she could be back to Gaza or not.
Yeah. Khalil, first of all, I want to say my sincerest condolences for your loss and the loss of your family members, of course. While a growing number of people are aware of the occupation of the Palestinian people, not all will be aware of the colonial roots of this struggle and how the current onslaught in Gaza is connected to an ongoing process of ethnic cleansing. Our producer, Sina Khalil, has this explainer.
This is a map of Palestine in 1917, and this is it today. To understand how we got here, these are a few key moments you need to know. Before the British Mandate in Palestine, Jews made up about 6% of the total population. In 1917, the British Empire pledged to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, and the Zionist movement encouraged mass migration of Jewish settlers, mainly from Europe. And between 1918 and 1947, the Jewish population in Palestine grew from 6% to 33%. In 1947, the UN adopted Resolution 181, which called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, but the Palestinians and surrounding Arab countries rejected this proposal. And then in 1948, more than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes in order to create the State of Israel. This was called the Nakba, also known as a catastrophe. Israel ended up occupying 78% of historic Palestine, and the remaining 22% was divided into what's now occupied West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip. But 1948 wasn't the only time Palestinians were displaced. During the Six-Day War in 1967, 300,000 more Palestinians were displaced, and Israel officially occupied all of historical Palestine. And then in the 1990s came the Oslo Accords, where the occupied West Bank was divided into 3 parts. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Israel continued to displace Palestinians, primarily through illegal settlements and land grabs. Today, with Israel's latest war on Gaza, over 1 million Palestinians have been displaced, many of them forced to flee several times, and more than 35,000 killed. As their homeland shrinks, many Palestinians say the Nakba is still ongoing.
Khalil, we're seeing a mass displacement of people yet again now in Gaza, with the Israelis touting this idea of so-called voluntary migration of Palestinians, calls to recolonize Gaza, and of course this construction of these walled camps in the Sinai. What relationship do you see between these historical events and what's happening right now?
The relationship is very clear. I think that the Israeli society and the Israeli political elites never recognized Nakba and the great and grave injustice that happened in 1948 to the Palestinians. In a sense, when you live in a denial and a complete justification of crimes such as ethnic cleansing, there is really no room for why you wouldn't repeat that again. And not only that, they never really repented or recognized the grave mistake of 48, but for so long, the Israeli politicians and Israeli society have mentioned all the time the fact that the Palestinians are posing demographical challenge for the Jewish state. And if you want to extend your sovereignty of certain areas where Palestinians are living there, and if the demography is a challenge for you, thus you have to get rid of this demography. They've done this in different ways. We've seen this within 48, in the way they did it with restriction over who you could marry and who you could love even. People in Nazareth cannot marry a Palestinian from Ramallah, or people from Ramallah cannot marry a Palestinian from Gaza. All sort of restriction to ensure that the demography is balanced enough for a Jewish state to exist. And then in any opportunity, such as 48 and such as today, when there is a war, the first thing that the Israelis, and especially the right wing within Israel, think of is ethnic cleansing again. And I would have to correct something, that they mentioned such a thing as voluntary immigration from Gaza. But there is nothing voluntary about destroying the entire infrastructure in a city, including schools, including hospitals, including churches, including mosques, and then say, well, there is voluntary immigration. Everyone who's leaving Gaza today, those who are even paying fees to leave Gaza, they are not voluntarily leaving. They are forced to leave to have the necessity for their life. People are leaving because they need access to education. Others are leaving because they need access to food. Others are leaving to deliver their own babies, because all necessity of life does not exist in Gaza.
And of course, many can't leave at all. Let's take a look at a clip from Darin's film Farha, based on the true story of a Palestinian girl who survived the Nakba of 1948. Here she plays it for Nakba survivors.
Scared.
Darin, what was it like showing this film to the 1948 survivors? And also, why did Israel try to ban the film?
When I showed this film to them, I was nervous, actually. But I was really, it confirmed to me that everything in the film is real and true, and they related to the film and to the scenes. And they talked about the smallest details, and to me that was huge, because I have this fear of losing these people, because they the occupation depended. They said the old will die and the young will forget, and I always had this fear of losing these people, and I wanted them to see the film and to live this experience, this trauma that we inherited from them.
Yeah.
So it was really important for me, because the film has been traveling around the world and the West, and it's an eye-opener for the world, but also it was made for these people who lived this and survived this. And my father, by the way, is one of them.
Aya, there is one symbol which is a universal representation of Palestinian displacement and right to return, a reminder of their commitment to their homeland. And that's the key, of course. Can you tell us about this symbol?
I think for our families, it's one of the only material things that a lot of people hold that proves that they were there, if that makes sense. I think about this a lot with my work as an artist, because a lot of what I learned from our elders and our community members about what happened to them is passed to us orally, and they don't have much left of their lives before because they were forcibly displaced. So the symbol of the key, like my grandfather has his key to his house hung up in his house with a little plaque that he made that says, this is the key to my house in Palestine. And it's one of the only like physical things left.
Well, keeping the culture alive and preserving memories of the homeland is important to many Palestinians, not least to counter a central Zionist myth that Palestine was a barren land waiting to be populated.
في جملة كانوا يستعملوها الأعداء، إحنا جينا لبلاد ما فيها ناس، لناس ما إلهن بلاد. طيب أنا بدي أثبت إنه هذه بلاد كانت مليانة ناس. من أول ما بديت أجمع كنت في طريقة بسيطة، يعني ما كنت مفكرة إنه بده يتطور هالموضوع أو إنه السياسة بدها ترجع لورا هالقد مثل ما هي هلأ. فكرت إنه بس بدي أحافظ على بعض الأتواب الجميلة. لقيت الموضوع أغمق من هيك كتير. التسجيل، الكتابة عن هذا التراث كتير كتير مهمة، لأنه العدو بده يمحي التراث هذا.
Darin, I was struck watching this. There's this attempt on one hand to preserve these beautiful dresses that eventually then turns into a museum of Palestinian culture. How do you balance keeping the culture alive with preserving it in the face of these attempts to erase it?
I think this was one of the things that I really at some point while writing Farha, I wanted to make the whole film happen in the room, but then I changed my mind and I wrote like the first 20 minutes and the last part of the film happening outside, because I wanted to show and to expose their false claim that it was a land without people for people without a land. I wanted to show the land and the people and the culture and heritage and the colors and the richness and this history and this land, Palestine. And actually, I think the Palestinians, until today, they're very, very careful how to preserve this. Not only me as an artist, but every Palestinian. I see them holding into these cultural things that the occupation is trying to erase or even steal.
Yeah.
So we see them teaching their children, the young, about this, and even our language, the smallest details. So I think it's our duty, our responsibility to do this in whatever we're doing, because I think that the Palestinians today are showing the whole world how no matter how far we are from Palestine, we will fight until we return. We will never forget, and we will keep fighting until we win.
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Aya, was Palestinians are now dispersed all across the world. You can find Palestinians in Latin America, Australia, Europe, America. How do you preserve this culture, keep it alive when you are dispersed in so many different parts of the world?
Yeah, so it's like I was saying, a lot of what happens to us has been passed down to us orally, and everything that I've ever learned has been orally relayed to me, because in 1948, we were stripped of everything material and restricted from building any sort of power or coalition, even before that, under British colonialism. And it's important that we use what platforms and resources or skills that we have to document our stories and histories, because that's one of the only things that directly counters Israeli archival records and institutions. They hold the mainstream accepted narrative because they hold state power and therefore, by default, legitimacy. And I think a large part of the shift in the global perspective on Palestine has been, for example, the internet, with Palestinians sharing pictures and videos of what happens to us. And that's part of countering the occupation's narrative and the propaganda that they've been suing for 100 years now. And also, like when we look at the college protests in the US, for example, like a lot of these students, they're entering globally recognized esteemed institutions, and they're protesting and disrupting these spaces and talking about what's happening to us. And this turns heads because they're in these recognized esteemed institutions.
Well, resisting the cultural erasure that occurs through displacement is at the core of much of Palestinian diasporic culture, including in this song by Palestinian-American rapper Sami Shiblak called 48 Mile.
أرجع على بلادي مفتاح في جيبتي. And I do this for the martyrs, mothers losing babies. It's been a long time coming, but ain't shit changed. This ain't terrorism, Pierce, this is liberation. Now who the hell got y'all thinking that some white Europeans was indigenous to Palestine? See it with your eyes, every day feel like calling.
Khalil, Palestinian men are often very poorly represented in the resistance to occupation and displacement, but many men will feel a responsibility to protect their families in times of crisis. Do you feel that Palestinian men are misrepresented?
Well, we are misrepresented as the rest of the Palestinians. I'm not sure if in particular a Palestinian man are misrepresented, but I think there is an assumption in the Western world generally, as they're reporting about men deaths, usually is that men's life in Gaza matter less, because the assumption usually is that men tend to be combatants, and thus every death or killing of a man is a killing of a combatant. That's how, like, people who run the numbers, because literally the Palestinians in Gaza are treated as numbers. However, that's not the situation. The truth is, a lot, if not the majority of men who are being killed in Gaza right now, they're being murdered. They're not really combatants. They are not part of any resistant group or any militant groups, and they're just being killed. But yes, there is a cultural burden that men has to carry, that is to try to protect the family and to defend the family and do the best for them. And I don't think these are negative things necessarily. I think these are positive things. However, it adds a larger burden. I mean, someone like myself, who lives in the US, felt really deeply disturbed at the fact that my sister had to pass away, and I wasn't there to protect her. I wasn't able to even get to Gaza to bury my sister. It's a certain burden that, as a Palestinian man, I have to carry. But I would also allude that resistance have different meanings. Part of it is armed resistance, part of it is protest, etc. But in the Palestinian context, just to be on your own land and to refuse the displacement is to resist. The people who stayed in the north, despite the carpet bombing in the north of Gaza, despite the starvation, people have spent almost 2 months not having any access to fruits or meat. They only had like some certain canned food that would be dropped on them from airdrops. These are also people who are participating in resistance and refusing to be displaced and to leave their own land. So resistance have different forms, and anyone can participate.
Darin, some people describe the ongoing experience of displacement and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, as part of an anti-colonial struggle. Is that how you see it?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Palestinian struggle is against the colonial occupation of the land and the people, and this is why I made Farha to resist. As Khalil said, it's my way of resisting this occupation and this their trial to erase our history, the truth. Because you asked me also why did the Israeli government get upset, and it's because when the occupation started, the war of narrative also started in 1948, where they created this false propaganda, again, that it was a land without people for people without a land, that it's called the War of Independence, and that the Arabs hate them, and that it's a religious conflict and all these things, because back then we didn't have social media, and they wanted to win the world's compassion, for the world to approve their existence, and I think this is why we have to keep resisting and making art, making anything we can do just to fight back. And you can see now the Palestinians are leading, hopefully, the world's last anti-colonial battle, and they will win again. And the whole world now is showing solidarity, and they're raising the Palestinian flag, and they're wearing kufiya around the world, and the whole world know that it will happen.
Well, I'd like to end today's episode with a song by Palestinian Jordanian singer Darin J Sallam about the heartbreak of the ongoing Nakba and the resilience of the Palestinian people.
البيت بقلبي وانا راجع وبايدي ولدي ولو كل العالم كان ضدي انا راجع مكان كل الدنيا بلادي من قديم الزمان الفروق بينا حدود كلام على الورق مكتوب والمكتوب أصبح قيود تمنعني أشوف بلادي.
Thank you to Darin, Aya and Khalil for joining us today. What did you think of today's show? Let us know on social media. We love to hear from you. Use the hashtag or the handle AJStream to let us know what you'd like to see more of, and we will look into it. Stay awake, and I'll see you soon.